In the winter of 1907, thousands of residents of Detroit, future motor capital of America, gathered on the shores of a river, frozen under 3 inches of ice. The wealthier spectators filled the bridge and nearby embankment. From this bridge, about 15 meters high, a man was to be thrown, his arms and legs shackled, known to the public only through wild rumors and sensational newspaper headlines. This would-be suicide, a short, athletic young man, appeared unfazed by the biting cold and wind that whipped through his jet-black hair. Local police volunteers placed shackles on his ankles, locked his elbows behind his back with 1 pair of handcuffs, and added 3 more pairs to his wrists. When preparations were complete, the man calmly asked to be tossed over the railing. 2 burly constables carefully lowered the chain-bound body into the void, toward a gaping hole in the ice 3 meters below. There was a splash. Thousands gasped. An excited murmur rippled through the crowd. People were placing real bets in a game with a man's life on the line. According to the posters, the madman was supposed to resurface from the icy water within 4 minutes, free of shackles and handcuffs. According to common sense, surviving underwater for more than 1.5 minutes, even in warm water and without iron restraints, was practically impossible. The skeptics were partly right. The madman did not surface in 4 minutes, nor in 6. Only after 8.5 minutes did a head break through the dark surface of the water. A man who had once again emerged alive, defying death in front of thousands. It was the great Houdini, a solo performer who challenged logic, fear, and every lock in existence. Harry Houdini, born Erik Weisz, the son of a Hungarian rabbi who had emigrated to the United States, was born in Budapest in 1874, but grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin. A childhood of poverty taught him to get by with little. And yet, his journey to the stage began with something as simple as a sweet tooth. His parents locked away jam and cookies, only handing them out on Sundays. At the age of 4, Erik figured out how to open the cupboard without a key. By 5, he attended his first circus, and from that moment, he knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He spent his days rummaging through junkyards, hunting for old locks and strange bits of metal. He taught himself to read in just a week, just so he could devour cheap magic books. Imitating the fakirs he had seen at the circus, he walked on coals and held his breath underwater until he saw purple spots before his eyes. He begged his older brothers to tie him up so he could practice escaping. He trained himself to endure pain, holding his hand over a candle flame. He climbed chimney flues and scaled brick walls with ease. Even as a child, he was already rehearsing for immortality. At 9 years old, he walked into a traveling circus tent and asked to join the troupe. The circus owner laughed, but in a generous mood, let the bold little boy show what he could do. Erik asked to be tied by the ankles and hung upside down over the arena so that his ear nearly touched the ground. Then he had them bind his arms behind his back and scatter about 20 pins across the floor, placing a sheet of paper in the center. To the astonishment of the performers, he used his eyelashes to gather each pin and place them on the paper. The very next day, his name appeared on the circus posters. A few months later, the circus moved on. Since his parents refused to let the youngest Weisz travel with it, Erik had to find work in a local workshop, most likely that of a locksmith or metal worker. He helped repair anything with a lock. By age 12, Erik could open virtually any lock without a key, including the handcuffs frequently brought in by the town sheriff, who kept misplacing the keys. At 16, realizing he had no future in Appleton, he moved to Chicago and joined a local circus. During his act, he did what no one had done before. He escaped from any number of handcuffs placed on him by volunteers from the local police force. At the time, his idol was Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, not Robert Houdin, a French illusionist who had written several books on practical magic. When the time came to adopt a more exotic stage name, in keeping with the circus fashion of the era, Erik took on the name Harry Houdini as a tribute to Robert Houdin. But on stage, Erik copied no one. He was already crafting his own unique style. Fame came to Houdini in 1897 when he first dared to perform a stunt before a large crowd of journalists and police officials. At 23, Houdini announced to the press that he would escape from solitary confinement in the infamous Chicago jail, shackled hand and foot, locked behind as many doors and locks as they liked, and that every lock would remain completely intact. The prison warden eagerly accepted the challenge, adding one condition. If this Jewish Italian failed to escape, he would spend the next 3 months in jail for petty fraud. Houdini was stripped and thoroughly searched by 2 prison doctors. Naked and without tools or hidden picks, shackled hand and foot, he was locked in the solitary cell. The door could only be opened from the outside with 2 different keys. The press and the wardens left. 3.5 minutes later, Houdini joined them, carrying the now useless shackles and cuffs draped casually over his right shoulder. From that moment, impresarios and reporters hounded him. The first offered contracts, the second, headlines. In cheap boarding houses, dozens of journalists interviewed the maestro, who, without interrupting the conversation, did the most astonishing things. He tied silk cords into dozens of complex knots and then untied them with his toes. He shuffled 2 decks of cards simultaneously, one in each hand, or suddenly pulled his guest's watch from his vest pocket. He denied any use of trickery or supernatural forces. "Everything I do," Houdini declared, "can be explained by the laws of physics, daily training, and my ability to endure pain." Over the following year, he toured the most notorious prisons in the United States, escaping solitary cells and death row with extraordinary ease and speed. He allowed himself to be bound with any type or amount of shackles, then freed himself within 5 minutes. At the State Mental Hospital in New Jersey, he escaped from a straitjacket designed specifically for the most dangerous inmates. In one prison, he was locked inside a fireproof safe with a highly complex combination lock and emerged 3 minutes later. Eventually, he was offered a contract at one of New York's most luxurious variety theaters, the Orpheum. Once a pauper, he now earned $1,000 a week, with his name in the largest letters on the playbills. From then on, anything he did was met with thunderous applause. Houdini developed a whole new repertoire of stunts. He was locked in crates, trunks, and specially designed containers with impossibly thick walls and intricate locks. He was thrown off bridges with his hands chained and a weight tied to his legs. He was sewn into sacks or strapped in straitjackets and hung upside down from the tops of skyscrapers, and always emerged unharmed. In 1902, Houdini set out on a European tour. In England, he was locked inside a metal vat filled with ale, sealed with 12 external locks. 15 minutes later, slightly drunk from the alcoholic fumes, he walked into the brewery through the back door. In Germany, he bet the chief of Hamburg's secret police that he could escape from specially designed restraints, invented by a cunning engineer at the request of the Kaiser himself. In Russia, after making a wager with Colonel Orlov of the gendarmerie, he escaped from the infamous iron carriage used to transport political prisoners to Siberia. This vehicle was said to be unopenable. It could only be locked with a key kept in St. Petersburg and unlocked with another kept far across the Urals, in Nerchinsk. Houdini performed before Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, who ordered a special box built for him, one declared by experts to be absolutely tamper-proof. Houdini opened it in 20 seconds. In Monaco, he won 5,000 francs at roulette and immediately lost interest in what he called a primitive pastime. In Paris, skeptical locals shackled him, locked him in a trunk full of iron scrap, and sank it to the bottom of the Seine. The crowd erupted in cheers when he surfaced. Houdini's name was on everyone's lips, from aristocratic salons to seedy beer halls. Former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, stunned by his act, personally requested an autograph. Houdini had become a living legend. When he returned to America, he was at the peak of his fame. He was no longer just Houdini. He was the great Houdini. Did this man have a pact with the devil? Was he made of the same flesh and blood as everyone else? These questions fascinated his contemporaries just as much as they intrigue his biographers today. Houdini himself wrote, "I deny all mysticism. Nothing gives a person a chance to win in any situation except willpower. My will allows me to suppress pain and fear. It drives me to move 10 times faster and escape situations others call hopeless. Every muscle in my body can function independently. Every finger on my hands or feet is trained to fight steel on equal terms. Every time I take a risk, I know I have no right to fail." He claimed to unlock restraints, either by striking precisely at the right spot or with the help of a master key cleverly hidden on his body. But neither method has ever been proven. The secrets died with him on an autumn evening in 1926. In many ways, the second half of Houdini's life is the most enigmatic. Starting in the 1910s, he seemed determined to test the very limits of human capability. Each new stunt he performed was undoubtedly life-threatening, and with no real rivals left, his only worthy opponent became death itself. In 1912, in New York, he was locked inside a steam boiler filled with water. The furnace was lit, and the water began to heat rapidly. A delay of even a few minutes would mean certain, agonizing death. But Houdini seemed to take pleasure in the danger itself. In 1914, on Cape Cod, fishermen sewed him inside the belly of a freshly caught whale. Half suffocated and covered in his own vomit, Houdini escaped from this biblical prison in 28 minutes. The following year, he began a terrifying series of buried-alive experiments. At first, he was buried naked and in chains 3 feet underground, about 1 meter, then 4.5, and finally the standard 6 feet of a human grave. In Los Angeles, during one such stunt, he truly felt death's presence. In his diary, he wrote, "For the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid. I had always been buried in the soft soil of the East Coast, but this time, 6 feet of rock and sand pressed down on me, choking my nose and mouth. I nearly blacked out and clawed my way to the surface on sheer willpower." The newspapers wrote, "At that moment, Houdini was terrible to look at. He was coughing up blood and could not stand. His ears and nose were full of sand, and his whole body was covered with scratches." His next act involved being sealed inside a special metal coffin. All openings were welded shut, and a heavy metal ring clamped the lid from above. Then the coffin was submerged in a pool. There was almost no air inside. Even with his highly trained lungs, Houdini had no more than 3 or 4 minutes to escape. From the outside, even experienced tinsmiths would have needed half an hour to open the coffin. Houdini escaped in just 2 to 2.5 minutes, but the strain was visible on his face. Witnesses said it had turned completely blue. He was once encased in solid plaster and broke free from his own sculpture. After one such experiment, already in his 50s, he began suffering from severe back pain. For the first time in his life, he saw a doctor who was horrified by the results. Houdini had a torn renal pelvis, a broken rib, and serious ligament damage in his wrist. "You must stop performing immediately. Otherwise, you will die very soon," the doctor warned. Houdini smiled and replied, "2 weeks of rest, that's all I can promise. I've never allowed myself to lose." Still, he began performing less frequently, introducing acts that gave him time to recover. For example, swallowing a spool of thread and a box of needles, then pulling the needles back out of his mouth, already threaded. He walked through walls. He read minds. Among this ordinary stage magic, he was saving his strength for the final act, one everyone expected, including Houdini himself. In October 1926, Houdini gave a lecture at McGill University, exposing dishonest illusionists, fakirs, and mediums. At the end, he performed one of his most difficult stunts, escaping from a cocoon made of several wet sheets. After the show, 2 students came to his dressing room. One of them was the university's boxing champion. While congratulating Houdini, the boxer casually asked if it was true he could withstand a blow to the solar plexus. Houdini didn't quite hear the question, but nodded just in case. A moment later, he was hit with a series of brutal punches to the stomach. He said nothing, only gestured for the young man to stop and asked the others to leave. That evening, he began to feel unwell. For the next 3 days, he continued performing as usual, his only visible symptom being a ghastly pallor. On the 4th day, he collapsed on stage. Doctors were shocked. By the time of the blows, Houdini had already been suffering from acute appendicitis. The punches had ruptured the infected area and several major blood vessels. In such cases, death usually follows within 3 to 4 hours. Houdini went on performing, and then fought for his life for another week in a hospital bed. Before he died, he told his wife, "I'm tired. I don't want to fight anymore." He was buried at Cypress Hills Cemetery in New York, locked in a lavish family crypt built to his specifications. The crowd lingered for hours, waiting for something to happen, or perhaps simply refusing to believe that Harry would never again emerge from behind that grim iron door, smiling, dragging the useless chains that death once tried to bind him with.